Hey everybody, this is one of your hosts, Archie. I just wanted to jump in before the episode started and let you guys know my chair was really squeaky throughout this episode. I'm going to fix that for the next episode. I did my best to edit it out as much as possible throughout this episode, but unfortunately you can still hear it throughout. Secondly, I said the word Hindi when I meant Hindu like 8 times throughout this episode. We were recording pretty late at night and I was just making some mistakes, so I'm sorry about that. Anyway, hope you guys enjoy this first episode of Real Belief.
Welcome to Real Belief, a podcast exploring the wonders of religion through the lens of cinema. I'm one of your hosts, Xavier, and I'm joined by my co-host, Archie.
Howdy there, Xavier. How are you doing tonight?
Good. Thanks for having me on this podcast.
Well, it's our podcast, so thanks for performing it with me. Couldn't have done it without you. You are our resident religion expert, after all.
I am. And please refer to episode 0 if you're not familiar with our particular backgrounds. It kind of gives you a good synopsis of what our established backgrounds are. Yeah. That way it's not out of the blue for anyone.
Yeah, just do a quick summary. Obviously, we go more into detail on that. I'm not really religious at all, and Xavier here is a good old Catholic boy. So that's right. Where we are coming from when we do this. And this is our first ever episode, and we figured we'd start with a banger from a pretty big director. Would you like to introduce the movie, or shall I?
It is Silence, 2016 Silence by Martin Scorsese, starring Andrew Garfield, Adam Driver, Liam Neeson, some heavy hitters tonight.
Those are some heavy hitters.
I've really wanted to watch this movie for a long time. I mean, Andrew Garfield, I think, is a pretty underrated actor in general. Actually, before this film, I've only seen him in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, but I've heard a lot of good stuff about him. Adam Driver, my wife's in love with him, but he's a good actor also. I like him a lot. As Kylo Ren, and I've also seen him in other films like Marriage Story and Liam Neeson. All good actors in a film about religion, so this definitely immediately caught my eye as something I wanted to explore with you.
Mm-hmm. And obviously it's directed by who is, I think he was voted like 4th best director of all time, but he's inarguably one of the best directors of all time, who is Martin Scorsese. Have you seen much of his movies, or is this not your first one, or is this one of your like second or third one or something like that? How many of you seen?
I was looking through his directed movies, and I'm pretty sure this is my first one.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah, I've seen clips of other movies that he's directed, but this is my first full movie from him.
So not even like, obviously the big one's like Taxi Driver, but that's older and a little bit more niche. I mean, it's not niche, it's pretty mainstream, but if you're just like a casual movie going person, you may not have seen it. What about like Goodfellas is probably a really big one. What is it? Wolf of Wall Street from a couple of years. What was that? 2013. I think Wolf of Wall Street was his last movie he made before Silence, which is funny because they're very, very different movies. But
yeah, no, I haven't seen any of those.
Wow. Irishman from 2 years ago? That one from Netflix.
It's another one that I wanted to get to, but also have not seen it. So I guess, yeah, this is my very first.
I can't judge you on Irishman. I haven't seen that one either. I keep wanting to watch it, but it's just really long, and I never feel like I want to sit down for that long to watch that movie.
It's 3 hours, or is it 3.5?
I think it's 3.5. It could just be 3. Either way, like I do want to watch it, but I'm just bad at watching stuff at home.
To be fair, this movie's 3 hours.
2:45, and that includes credits. So really, like 2:30.
Did it feel like a drag for you at all? Like the pacing, as someone who's like familiar with, I don't know. I feel like I watch movies more casually, and you're definitely more of the expert when it comes to like the pacing of movies and stuff like that.
I feel like we really start doing that. Why don't we give early on? I quick summary of the movie, and since you introduced the movie, I'll go ahead and do the quick summary. So, like you said, the film follows lovely old Adam Driver and Andrew Garfield. I'm trying to remember their character names. It's Garupe is Adam Driver, and Rodrigues is Andrew Garfield. And they are 2 Jesuit priests from Portugal, and they're mentor, father figure. I mean, he's another father. He is a priest as well. But he's like their father figure. He's the one who mentored them into priesthood. At least that's what you sort of infer. He has gone missing in Japan, assumed either dead or converted or denounced God, or there's sort of rumors about what he's done. So they go to Japan to rescue him and prove that he has not turned away from God. They get to Japan, they find hidden Christians there. They help them rediscover their faith and repractice their faith. We have a few encounters with a few different inquisitors. Adam Driver, Andrew Garfield, they get split up, and then they are both imprisoned in their own ways and tortured, abused, all of these different things into either renouncing God or dying, essentially. And the end of the film, that's exactly what happens. Andrew Garfield seemingly renounces God and gives up his Christian faith and lives the rest of his life as a good Japanese citizen, seemingly. Right up until the end, where they're giving him a Buddhist burial, where they are burning his corpse. And you see that he is holding a little tiny cross that he had been hiding all of these years. So perhaps he never really left God at all. Was that a decent enough summary, or do you think you had anything you wanted to add?
No, that was really good.
Thank you. So when we discuss this film, we're not going to go scene by scene. I think we're just going to kind of touch on our big points. You were talking about pacing. Like I said, I feel like early on, I didn't dig the pacing, but I feel like I'm trying to think about where it was. I think about the time they go to the second village, I think it's Goto. When Andrew Garfield's character goes to Goto, I feel like that's when the pacing really picks up for me. I don't know if it's just because I finally connected with the characters a little bit more and I understood a little bit more about where they're coming from. But at that point, it just started to pick up pace for me. What was your thoughts on the pacing?
Oh, I thought the pacing was fine. It didn't feel like there's definitely movies that have been an hour to an hour and a half that felt like 3 hours. So I felt like this was the other way around. I thought the time flew relatively quickly, but maybe I went into it a little bit more invested just from my like preconceived interest.
No, that's fair. I will say this movie hooked me pretty quickly. Like the introductory scene where you see Liam Neeson's character, Father Ferreira, it's him voicing over a letter he wrote back to the church saying what's happening there, which is that Christians are being persecuted, executed, tortured. Every horrible thing you could think of under the book was happening to them. And he doesn't know if he's going to get to respond anymore. And it shows the ways that they were being tortured and everything. I think that is a really effective opening. And then cuts to Adam Driver and Andrew Garfield's reactions. And that scene just reminded me how good both of them are as actors. Like, Andrew Garfield, like you said, he's underrated. And I think that's mostly because of the Amazing Spider-Man movies. Like, I think he followed up Tobey Maguire, who, even though he's not necessarily... Like, I love the Maguire movies, but he doesn't do the best acting in those movies at times.
Ooh, controversial.
I mean, there's memes based off of his bad crying faces.
Yeah, that's fair.
And like, trust me, I love the Sam Raimi movies more. Like, Sam Raimi's one of my, if not my favorite director. And I don't love 3. A lot of people have turned around to start defending 3, which I don't. But anyway, Andrew Garfield, he had to follow that up. And his first movie was okay. And his second movie was just so bad, but it wasn't his fault in any way. Like, the studios just crammed so much shit in there that it was hard for him to shine and seem good. Even though he was good in that role, he just wasn't given the time to shine. I think that kind of tarnished his reputation as an actor, because he did this. He's done... is it Hacksaw Ridge that came out the same year, where he was a pacifist army medic? And he really good in that. Adam Driver, he's really great in Star Wars, but the problem is when actors go into these big mainstream blockbusters, you sort of forget that they are genuinely good actors, and that maybe they're just doing that for the paycheck, or maybe they're really passionate about that project. But then you see them in things like this or Marriage Story, and you realize, oh wait, this guy can act. But yeah, you realize like Adam Driver, he can really act, and they both shine in that opening scene. I will say Andrew Garfield's accent threw me at first, but you settle into it pretty quickly.
For me, sometimes I feel like accents are a little bit hard to follow in movies. Maybe it's just like my big dumb American brain. But I feel like depending on the dialogue being said and like what the accent actually is and how well the actor can perform the accent, Sometimes I just have to
Mhm.
like turn on subtitles because I don't know what's being spoken.
I understand that. I think Adam Driver was just being he didn't put on any sort of accent, did he? Because I don't.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, which
Well, I
I think
no,
maybe why it
actually,
threw me
maybe
the
it was a. I feel like he did have an accent, but I feel like
maybe.
it wasn't as intense as Andrew Garfield's, and
Hmm.
his kind of
And
stuck out more because he was the
really did it.
main character. Yeah, he
Yeah.
was invested.
Mhm. I think part of the confusion for me, at least, was they probably said it and I just missed it, but they're Portuguese, and I must have missed that, and I couldn't figure out if he was trying to do like an Italian accent. But then I saw his name was Rodriguez, and I'm like, oh, maybe he's doing a Spanish accent, but it didn't sound right to me. And then once I said Portuguese, I'm like, oh, I don't know what a Portuguese accent sounds like. So he could be nailing this. Like, this could be the best Portuguese accent, and I would never know because I don't think I've ever heard a Portuguese accent.
How do you think
Um,
this film stacks up, like opposed to Martin Scorsese's other films?
so it's kind of weird to compare because it's so. I mean, it's similar in a lot of ways. Like, there's a lot of long tracking shots and stuff that he uses in his other movies, but in general, it's really different from most of the things I've seen. Obviously, he has like Kundun and Last Temptation of Christ, which are both other religious epics, and he has a few other like historical epics. Um, what is it? Gangs of New York is a historical epic, but it's about gangsters. Or you have, um, oh no, I can't remember the name of it now. It's his movie about The Aviator about Howard Hughes. That's a historical epic as well, and it's really good. So it stacks up pretty well compared to those. It's hard to compare. Like, his main body of work is gangster flicks, and it seems kind of weird to compare a slow, thoughtful, like, meditation on faith and what it means to keep faith to a gangster movie.
Right.
I mean, it's good. It's good. It's a good Martin Scorsese film. I haven't seen a bad one yet. Again, I haven't seen all of his movies, but of the ones I've seen, I would say I haven't seen a bad one. Anyway, we were talking about how you hadn't really seen much of Scorsese's films. Do you know much about Scorsese personally,
No,
like as a
no,
person?
not really.
So obviously, he's done a couple of religious films in the past, and you said you've heard mixed things about Last Temptation of Christ.
Oh yeah, definitely. I know. Unlike, I know a lot of Catholics have like condemned the movie essentially,
Mm-hmm.
like basically saying like this is sacrilegious. Do not watch this. It's like blasphemous. Just all sorts of negative. There's a very negative aura in the Catholic and I'm sure Christian community about that film.
Mm-hmm. So again, I haven't seen it, and I'm not Catholic or Christian, but that surprises me given what I know about Scorsese, because he was almost going to be a priest before he decided to become a
Oh,
filmmaker.
really? That's
Like
crazy.
he was on the path to become a Catholic priest, and he was super into the church. He was an altar boy. He was involved constantly. He said like the church basically saved him from a rough childhood, and he's really passionate about it, and that's why he's made a few religious films. This movie was one of his passion projects. Um, the Last Temptation of Christ was another passion project for him that he just really wanted to work on, and he couldn't get the funding for years because obviously a movie like this or Last Temptation of Christ isn't necessarily going to be a big jump for studios to hop onto.
Right.
So it's just weird that someone who, from my understanding, is super invested and involved in that community, one of his films about that subject particularly would be conceived or considered blasphemous. But maybe we'll have to watch it so we can actually kind of see where they're coming from.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Oh, I was gonna ask you something along the lines of the conflict that the fathers are facing in this film. Like, as someone who's not religious, what is your take on that? Like, their them being so adamant about not apostatizing.
I can, to a degree, understand where they're coming from because, I mean, as someone who isn't religious, I still have my own morality or my own philosophy that I believe in and I stand by, and I still wouldn't want to give that up because someone disagreed with it. Obviously, there's something less ethereal and less like powerful. Well, I don't want to say less powerful because it means a lot to me and it means a lot to other people I know. Um, I understand like not wanting to apologize. This is it actually leads me to a question I had for you. So I wrote this down. I can't remember exactly how I worded it, but later in the film, when he finally is about to apostatize and renounce God, so they made suspected Christians or known Christians step on an image of Christ, and they would do this to them like annually, monthly, whatever. The reason they did this is because imagery was like so powerful to Christians at the time, especially as like a minority.
Right.
Imagery was a good way to spread your faith. But when he's about to step on that, he hears, assumingly Jesus' voice, whether that be literal Jesus speaking to him or him thinking that in his mind to justify his own action to himself. I think there could be an interesting discussion about which you think that actually is. But Jesus says, "Step on me. I died on the cross for this pain and this suffering, so go ahead."
Mm-hmm.
So my question I'm trying to say is, would God or Jesus or whichever religious authority we're discussing in this scenario, would God want his worshipers, his lovers, his followers, his believers to suffer? Or would he prefer them to just, because the way I see it, you can like, I know obviously without having this faith, it's a little different. I feel like you could step on an image and it mean nothing as long as you still believe it in your heart. So would God not be okay with them publicly saying this and publicly doing this as long as they still believed in their hearts his truth, if it stopped them from being tortured, maimed, killed, and brutalized?
Yeah, I had like while I was watching this movie, I feel like this movie brings up a whole bunch of gosh, what would I do in this situation type of moments.
Yeah.
Especially as like a Catholic. I know that Jesus would not want you to renounce your faith in any way. Jesus, God. Just, there's a verse in scripture. It's Matthew 10, verse 32, saying, "Therefore, everyone who confesses me before men, I will confess him before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will also deny him before my Father in heaven." So to me, that verse is pretty clear cut. It's like it's wanting you to like. It's one of those difficult things in religion to say out loud.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. It's not. I didn't ask it expecting it to be an easy answer because, again, like the way that verse reads to me is if you confess or not confess, that sounds negative for some reason. Confess has like a negative connotation. If you admit your belief and your faith and your devotion to me in front of man, I will do the same to my Father, which means, hey, if you scratch my back, I scratch yours, essentially.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
But if you deny me, I will deny you as well. But I feel like then I would have a follow-up question. And again, this isn't meant to be easy or even have an answer. Why would you want to worship a God who would rather you suffer for his, I don't want to say vanity, but for his, they kind of say it in the movie, actually. So I'm gonna work on what the movie says, because when Rodrigues is in prison and he is being held captive, he is not really being tortured. Everyone else around him is being tortured. And it might even be his former teacher who has converted to Buddhism, who comes to him and says, it is your pride that is torturing these people, nothing else, or something along those lines, where he says that his pride and his refusal to do this is what's causing this problem. So I guess I'm trying to say, without it being disrespectful, why would you want to praise or worship a God who would rather you suffer and be tortured for his pride than let you publicly renounce your belief in him, even if you still hold those beliefs in your heart? Because isn't what is in your heart more important than what you say?
Yeah, that's a really good question. trying to think how I can articulate it. Yeah, I'd imagine, like, for me, I'd see the what you're describing as vanity as just a form of utmost love. Um, Essentially, just gosh, yes, that's a really good question.
Mm-hmm. And if you don't have an answer, that's fine. Like I said, it's not an easy one. So
I don't have an answer at the top of my head, at least in the way that would come off as I'm imagining. So I'm going to reflect on it, and then maybe we can come back to it.
okay, yeah. If you want to hop back in later, just speak up and say about this further question, and we can jump back into it. While we're kind of getting into the thick of this, and maybe we should have done this on top, and that's on me. How much do you know about like Japanese religious beliefs, both of the time and leading up to this time, and currently, and like the history around this movie?
Maybe not so much currently. I know a lot about. I wouldn't even say a lot. I know the history of Japan and like religious, kind of like you said earlier, just very physical, natural. Um, a lot of the religion was nature based, but I don't know a lot about what their religions were at the time, what the conflicts were like, and stuff like that.
So I want to give a brief historical context to this, so we can kind of, because if we bounce off of that, I think it can help us. And there's a point I want to make about one of the specific points of history that relates to this movie. So this movie set, I think it starts in 1633, which is when the intro scene with Liam Neeson's character is. And then when we jump to all of the scenes with Adam Driver and Andrew Garfield's characters, that is 1640, so 7 years later. Now, Japan in 1614, Japan had completely outlawed Christianity. They had banned it nationwide. And Japan at the time was under a shogunate government, which means there's like, that's the whole, like, if you think of stereotypical Japanese history where there's like a bunch of samurai, that's it. The shogunate history rule was there's shoguns, which were like district leaders, essentially. There wasn't like a central leader of Japan, it was a council. And they banned Christianity in 1614 for a myriad of reasons. Obviously, I'm not saying this because it justifies any of the like maiming or torture, because it never does. But I think if we put it into context, we can help us have a proper conversation about it. So part of why the several reasons why Japan banned Christianity, one of them was that they feared the Spanish Inquisition was like under the guise of Catholicism or Christianity, plotting some sort of secret coup, similar to what they did in North America like 100 years earlier, 200 years earlier, with like a lot of the natives, where they came in under the guise of spreading faith, and then they just sort of took control from the established rulers. They had also seen a lot of discrimination from Christian missionaries coming in that were like disrespecting Buddha, disrespecting Shinto religion, things that were sacred to Japan and Japanese history. They were desecrating and everything like that. And this is less confirmed, but there was some connection to the boats bringing the missionaries in, not the missionaries themselves, but the boats bringing missionaries in were being connected to Japanese Japanese citizens being sold in slave trades across the world. So when they took all these together, they realized, hey, this is a danger to our structure, our way of life, and they banned it. And the other thing is, Japan, the way Japan understands religion is entirely different than the Western world. Japan didn't technically have a word for religion until like 1853, like 200 years after this movie, or the modern concept of religion, because Japanese religion previously had been Shinto religion, which is what you're talking about, where it's all about nature, connecting with nature, spirit, like ancestor worship, stuff like that. That was the Shinto faith with the kami and the shrines that you can still see all across Japan. There's like those popular Shinto shrines. Then later on, Buddhism came along, And Buddhism missionaries, they were actually, what they did is they came in and they said, hey, your kami are actually your versions of our Buddha. They are one and the same. They are your Buddha, because Buddha can have multiple appearances, multiple forms. So they said, hey, your gods are our gods. And calling them gods is a bit of a stretch because they're not in the Western sense of the word. So when Japan saw these people coming in spreading this belief, it was so alien to them and destructive to the Japanese way of life that is why they ultimately outlawed it. And obviously they were horrible. I think this is probably the second or third worst persecution of Christians in history, unless there's one I'm missing. But it's like this and Rome are the two big ones, I think. Or do you know of any others?
No, I can't think of any at the top of my head.
So that's the setup for the plot. And what I wanted to lead into at that point is, like I said, the Buddhists came in and they didn't convert. They cooperated. They mingled. They intermixed. They combined the two faiths into a faith. And that's sort of what the Buddhism that they are worshiping in this movie and that they're talking about in this movie, the Japanese, is this Shinto combination with Buddha. They had what was called Shimbutsu Shiguro, I think is how you pronounce it, which was which was Kami and Buddha combined. I feel like there's an interesting thing to be said of, could Christianity have thrived in Japan if they had taken the same approach? And then the follow-up question would be, would they ever take that approach, do you think?
Yeah, I think Christianity probably would have thrived if it were taken at that approach. I don't think it would. In practice, I don't think Christians would allow that to happen, like a substitution. I think the Gospels are very clear that it's not very symbolic. It's not likes or ands. It's Jesus is the Son of God.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. Because, and then my thought would be, in the past, I don't know at what point this had really stopped happening, but Christianity throughout history has adapted. Like the Christianity that is worshipped now versus the Christianity that was worshipped 300 years after the death of Christ would be very different. Obviously, the core texts and the core beliefs are the same, but there would be so much that has been changed or adapted and adopted, because they would, like, we know Christmas is an adaptation of a pagan holiday,
right?
Which they tied to the birth of Christ based off of a potential that, because far as I understand, there's two potential dates for the birth of Christ. It's like December 25th and January 5th or something like that, depending on which of the texts you go off of. So the reason they chose December 25th is because there was already a pagan holiday, so it was easier for them to come in and adapt it. And there was already a Roman holiday, which was Sol Invictus, I think, which they were able to easily co-opt. So if they were able to do it so well in the past, at what point did they stop? Or is it because it's such a different core belief system, or such a different base belief? Is that why you think they wouldn't be?
Yeah, I think it's mostly because just it's a base relief. I know that the idea of Christmas is has always been represented to me as the birth of Christ. And even though it might not be scientifically sound that Jesus was born on December 25th, I think it's the celebration behind it. Just Christians celebrating the birth of Christ.
Yeah. It doesn't need to literally be his birthday.
Exactly. Whereas it's just, it's not a core belief.
Mm-hmm. No, I can definitely understand that.
So something really striking to me about the film was Chichiro? Chichiguro?
Kijigiro, I think. Yeah, Kijigiro
Yeah.
or something.
Um,
Kijigiro,
he,
I think.
as a Catholic, he represents, I feel like, a character that a lot of people can relate to, just someone who consistently like messes up but comes back to Christ asking for forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in the film, he asks for forgiveness 3 times. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, it's once on the beach after the scene where he gives away his rosary beads.
Right.
The
Once in the
second
jail
one
cell,
is in the jail.
and then once at the end of the movie, right? So 3 times.
Yeah, once at the end after everything had happened. And
Um,
then
go ahead.
do you think he actually believed, or was he just looking for some sort of way to rid himself of the guilt, and that was the route he chose? Because I feel like early on I took it as he doesn't really believe, he just needs to believe in something to take the guilt away from himself. But then after his last confession, you see he wears the symbol in his necklace, and he's putting himself at this much risk for it. And I feel like that maybe confirms that he did truly believe, but I wasn't sure if you maybe had a different interpretation of that.
I think um, I kind of wanted to take just like the overall belief and kind of lead it into a slightly different conversation.
Mhm.
What did you think about just the idea that Father Ferreira and Father Rodrigues, so Andrew Garfield's and Liam Neeson's character, what did you think of their dialogue at the end of the film? Just that these people were using these Catholic Christian symbols for just representations of what they already knew and believed.
I think it could potentially hold some weight because, like, as I had discussed with like Japan not really having a proper understanding of the Western idea of religion, um, because he says something along the lines of, I asked them what their closest analog to God is, and they said the sun. So when you say the Son of God rises every day here, because the Son of God is literally the sun. I think that's, again, because Christianity refuses to adapt because it's so hard to adapt. Because as Andrew Garfield says earlier in the film, um, if the truth isn't the truth everywhere, then what is it? Or something
Right.
along those lines. The problem is the Japanese base beliefs that they're going off of is just so drastically different that, yeah, it would be hard for Christianity to get roots there without some form of adaptation. And I feel like Liam Neeson, obviously it's hard to say what he really still believed, because he was obviously tortured for who knows how long. Even if he did renounce God, is it really a true renouncil, or is it just you have been tortured for months on end and you just want it to end and you'll say whatever it takes to get it to end,
Yeah, I feel like Father Ferreira's character, I feel like it was subtly implied that he still kept his faith after everything. His inner faith.
At one point, he says something along the lines of, he's talking to Andrew Garfield and he says "our God" or something along those lines. But it could be literally he still believes, or our God is in the collective idea of like Western Catholics or Western Christians bringing in an entirely different belief system. I feel like I really did enjoy the movie, and I know it's based loosely off of a true story. I think it could have been more interesting if Ferreira had converted of his own free will. Because I feel like having him convert due to torture sort of takes away some of the interest and intrigue there. Like maybe he comes to Japan and he learns all these new drastically different things, and he just changes on his own. Obviously that would be hard to realistically see from a priest, like a father, someone who's so dedicated to their faith.
Right.
But I don't think it's completely unheard of. It's happened across multiple religions in different ways throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would have made Andrew Garfield's conflict with him maybe a little more interesting, because when he sees Ferreira, he doesn't see someone who converted or renounced God so much as he sees someone who was broken, because he was beaten down and broken into this. And even his writings about why Christianity is wrong, none of it seems like it comes from him, because we later see that they're doing the exact same thing to Andrew Garfield, and it's not him doing it; it is him being told to do it.
Right.
And just, I feel like no matter how religious or devoted you may be, humans just have this base survival instinct built into them that's not going to let them die if there's a way out. Obviously, that's not completely true, but it's person to person, you know?
I feel like it's. I think one of the reasons why I like this film so much is because it highlights that I feel like as Christians, it's very common for us to be like, we die for God, we'd do this for God, we'd do that for God.
And it's easy to say if you're not
literally
in that situation.
Yeah, but it's also just like, I feel like in the moment, it'd be easier for you to die than to watch someone else slowly die. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that's one of the challenging things, like with my faith, that I've had to pray about and think about is, being put in the situation. What is the right thing to do?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're able to stop someone from hurting another person, especially the dialogue with Father Ferreira and Father Rodrigues, just saying, when Father Rodrigues is saying, these people didn't die for nothing, and Father Ferreira replies, "You're right, they died for you."
Yeah, and that leads to something really interesting too. And I think it's sort of one of the key ideas of the movie is when he's witnessing the people in the pits and Ferreira's there with him, he says they've already renounced God. They've already given up their faith. He says something, I forget exactly how he words it. Oh no, I actually have the quote pulled up right here. Andrew Garfield says something along the lines of like, you can't understand what I'm going through, something like that. And Ferrer says, I do, because you're just like me. You see Jesus in Jetheth's Main and believe your trial is the same as his. Those 5 in the pit are suffering too, just like Jesus, but they don't have your pride. They would never compare themselves to Jesus.
Yeah.
Do you have the right to make them suffer? I heard the cries of suffering in the same cell, and I acted. Like, that line, I think, is really good, because at what point is, like, because earlier I said, would you renounce God to save your own life? And that is obviously easier than to say, what if it was to save 5 lives? What if it was to save 500 lives? Like, again, let's go to that question I asked about, would God want you to do this? If you were in this situation where there's, but let's say in this scenario, you were being asked to renounce God, and if you did, they would free 50 people. Now, let's say these 50 people are children of God. They're devout Christians, devout Catholics. They fully believe. They go to church every Sunday. They fully participate in their religion. In that scenario, would God want you to renounce to save those 50 people who are also his children? Or would he rather you refuse and stay stubborn and let those 50 people get killed?
From what I understand and from what I know, I'd imagine that God would want us to still not renounce our faith.
Mm-hmm. But then, obviously, I don't know how much this matters. But then in the grand scheme of things, he's losing 50 devoted followers on Earth to save 1.
But or it could even be seen as those 50 devoted followers have come home to him.
True, that is one way to look at it. But I've always understood that he wants his children on Earth as long as possible to spread his name as much as possible. Or is that something I've misunderstood?
I wouldn't say that he wants them on Earth to spread his name. I know that we're called to go and spread the gospel. I'd say something that's even more important is just to be in communion with him.
Mhm.
which is why, kind of going back to that question you asked a while ago,
Mhm.
why would you worship of a god who is wanting you to suffer or for his own vanity, essentially? And I believe I answered something like it's an act of love. I feel like
You sort of did. You didn't have a full answer quite yet.
I try to elaborate on that a little bit. Just being in communion with God, uh, having dying for Him in this sense would be more important than spreading the gospel. Dying for Him, bringing coming home to Him, just a sign of that outward faith, suffering for Him as He suffered for you, for us. Uh, I think even for those 50 or 500 people, that would be more important than the apostasy. And it's kind of difficult to say, especially it feels a little bit like a red herring, uh, having people suffer from you not doing something.
Yeah.
Because even though you have the ability to prevent it, you're still not doing it.
Hmm. But then you get into the question of morality. Is if you have the power to stop something horrendous happening, should you not stop it?
Right.
And that's what I thought is, to you, are morality and religion one and the same? Are they loosely connected? Are they strictly connected? Are they connected in some ways, completely separate in others?
I'd say they're strictly connected, but maybe I'd need specifics.
Okay. Well, then I'll change my question, my earlier question. If you had to renounce God to save five people's lives, not from a theological perspective, not from a religious perspective, from a moral perspective, do you think you would have a moral obligation to do it to save those five lives?
Would this be without a conceived, so you said not theologically? So in this scenario, would I not be a Catholic?
No, no, no. So I'm saying approach the same question. So you are still a Catholic. You are still being asked to renounce God, all these things, but don't try and approach it from a theological perspective, because your theological perspective is obviously you never renounce God. You keep your faith no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
But would your moral code still tell you the same thing, that it is morally correct to do that, to keep your faith over morally correct saving those five lives?
So I guess the moral obligation would,
And that's what I mean by tying religion and morality,
right.
is, does your theology directly tie to it in that sense, or can you separate them in a obviously strenuous and extreme circumstance?
Yeah, in a strenuous circumstance like that, I feel like ideally I would like my theological and my shoot, what's the word you just said? Theological and
Moral.
moral. Thank you. Ideally, I'd like my theological and moral beliefs to remain the same, but I think if put into a strenuous situation like that, I'd have to separate them. I
Mm-hmm.
just think the conceived idea of being put in that situation, it's historically accurate, I'm sure, at some point in time.
Yeah.
I
Well, even today, if you go to certain places
right.
as a Christian, even.
Yeah. I think yeah. Gosh, I really enjoyed this film.
Yeah, no, it's really good. And I enjoyed that this has led to. I mean, we've been talking for almost an hour, and it barely feels like it. Like, this movie spurns on good conversation easily. And I just want to. I feel like maybe I haven't made this clear, but I don't think it's clear to you and the audience. Is I'm not asking any of these questions to be like disrespectful or to try and disprove God. I have no
Right, you're
interest
not
in
like
doing that.
trying to
That's
get
why.
gotcha moments.
Yeah, that's why I didn't introduce myself as an atheist, because I don't like identifying as an atheist. I mean, I am, if you go off the little definition, but it's like atheism has a connotation to it, which is mostly because of edgelords and 13-year-olds rebelling against their parents, of just trying to disprove God in every single way. And I don't believe personally, but I understand why people believe, and I can respect people that believe, and I don't want to necessarily take that away from them. I have problems with like organized religion in some sense, and maybe we can discuss that on a film where that is relevant. So I'm not going to touch on that too much here. I just want to get that out of the way, that when I'm asking these questions, I'm not trying to trip you up or get you. I just want to genuinely spurn like an interest, because like I said, I'm deeply interested in philosophy personally, and a lot of that ties in directly to religion and religious beliefs.
As I'll just refer to you as an atheist in this situation.
No, that's fine, because I mean, by the definition, that is what I am.
So as an atheist,
mm-hmm.
How do you feel about the idea of someone refusing to apostatize on the behalf of another life?
I mean, personally, I would say it's morally incorrect to not do it. To say, no, my belief is more important than your life. And that is because, again, I don't have that spiritual connection to any of it. I don't see my renouncing God as anything. So even though, or them renouncing God, like, to me, if they renounce God, because obviously I don't have that spiritual connection, I feel like what matters more than what you say is what you believe, especially in a strenuous circumstance, because this isn't a normal circumstance. You're not just renouncing God to get like $10 off at Target, if that was a thing. That would, then you're, even in that situation, you're morally a bad person because you are doing it. But in a situation where someone's life is at stake and all you have to do is say 3 words or do one symbolic act, I feel like morally you have to do that thing to save that life, because as long as you still believe in your heart and you can get forgiveness, you can earn forgiveness, then it should be okay. But again, I don't have that spiritual connection to it. And when you're put in a circumstance like the one that Rodrigues is in, I feel like there's a certain point where faith and arrogance, at least from a non-believer's point of view, can sort of become one and the same. Because I understand completely believing, and I have respect for certain characters, like what was his name? Mitsuko, I think, was the older guy earlier on in the film. Mokichi. Yeah, Mokichi, sorry, was his name. Was the guy who was crucified in the ocean. Mm-hmm. Him and that older man. I have a lot of respect for those people not renouncing their faith, because they stuck to their own code. They died for their own code, and they made the sacrifice for themselves. I don't have respect for Father Rodrigues at a certain point, because he is causing so much suffering for so much other people. When they're told that this can stop this torture of 50 people, 5 people, however much it is in certain scenes, because they say it once when there's all those people in the cage after he watches that guy get beheaded. Mm-hmm. And then then later on when he sees the 5 people in the pit. At that point, if to not do it is, in from my point of view, more about arrogant, or it comes off as arrogant, which I think can sort of be misconstrued with faith, or misunderstood in the place of faith. Because obviously faith is something that you, not arrogant in a negative sense, but you sort of have to be
right
about.
Yeah, and I think faith is one of those things, like, obviously faith is something that you can't physically prove. You can't mm-hmm. That's why it's called faith. So yeah, I could see how that could be easily just construed to be arrogance.
Mm-hmm. One thing I want to talk about is, do you remember like the trees and roots metaphors they had going on? They did it at first, I think, with Rodrigues and the Inquisitor. What is his name again? Ichio or something?
I just have him listed as interpreter, or are you referring to someone else?
No, the interpreter is the guy who translates between the two characters.
Right.
It's the actual like old guy who captures him and who is like the governor of the.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. He's not on my main cast.
Yeah, I don't see him listed on top cast, which is weird because he's a pretty main character.
But you're referring to the parts where they're saying that the ground or the soil's been poisoned. That's why the
roots won't take, or that's why the trees were uprooted and stuff like that. And then there was a whole thing about spreading the seeds and letting it flourish. And I think that was a really good conversation. I think that's a really good metaphor for faith and religion, especially in this specific scenario. And I feel like there's a lot of truth in that whole conversation about, obviously the roots were cut, the roots were poisoned, that's why they were uprooted, that's why nothing grew. It wasn't the tree's fault, it was something else affecting it. It wasn't the tree's fault, it wasn't the soil's fault, it was another actor. And I think that's a really well put and good metaphor for faith and spreading faith. One thing I said is, or one thought I had is, that argument could also be furthered upon, because what happens is Rodrigues says to Inoue, he says the roots were poisoned, that's why they couldn't take root, or that's why they are destroyed and no longer taking root. And then Inoue sort of doesn't have a response. And I feel like that's because there wasn't a good metaphor for this back then. But if like now you could expand that metaphor and respond back is, well, invasive species of plants come in and destroy their natural habitat, so they have to be poisoned and uprooted.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that is an interesting thing to add on to that already well done metaphor. It's just obviously invasive species weren't known about in 1640. So that sort of leads me on to another point, which is, as someone who is a Catholic, why does it seem like among Catholics there is such a strong need to convert people? And when I say people, I mean people who have completely different faiths, people who have no faith and chose to have no faith, not because they're uninformed. Why is you being saved and you're saving those that want to be saved not enough? Why is there this historical and not as much modern, but there's this big historical thing of trying to convert everybody?
Sure. Oh, and by the way, just as a disclaimer, I'm trying to answer these questions the best I can. But I'm sure
I
there's
understand.
other people who can either articulate them or who have the actual answers that I don't.
There's people who could like ask the questions in better ways than I can, and that can answer your questions in better ways. We're not experts here. We're just two people who are trying to have an interesting conversation.
I know that in the Gospels, Jesus asks us to spread the word of the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
Catholicism is different to me than other forms of Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Whereas, as someone who doesn't follow it, you can see the differences pretty drastically between like Protestants, Catholics,
right? I know,
and even among Protestants, there's so many different types,
like denominations and everything.
That's the word I was looking for.
I know. Earlier, you brought up how a lot of the teachings have changed from like Christmas. I believe the conversation was about.
Not so much the teachings, because from what I understand, the core teachings and texts have stayed the same. It's more so how they teach and how they worship.
Okay,
changed,
that's fair. Because I was just going to emphasize that, like, as a Catholic, we know, or we see Jesus passing down his line of authority to St. Peter, who becomes the first pope. Mm-hmm. St. Peter dies in Rome, and that's kind of where the Roman Catholic Church comes from. So from there, I think as a Catholic, we see Jesus' call to spread the Gospels, and for our faith, wanting to convert other people is derived from our love for them, in a sense of us wanting them to see salvation, to see the words Jesus spoke, just died, was crucified, was buried, rose again on the third day, ascended into heaven, all that good stuff. And I think sorry, go ahead.
That makes sense to me when you're talking about people who have no faith or people who are on the fence or confused. But and this goes, I'm just talking about Christianity and Catholicism because that is where you come from and that's what this movie focuses on. I don't know enough about, or I know that this happens across religions. There's a strong desire among other religions to also convert.
Right.
So I'm not trying to limit it to just one group. It's just this is the context that we're talking about it in. To me, there's no problem when you do it to people who, if completely don't believe like me, I get trying it. I don't engage in. I don't want to engage in a theological debate about someone who's going to try to convert me all the time because, to me personally, I don't think it's worth my time, but I don't want to be disrespectful to them either. Someone who's agnostic or on the fence, I also understand, are people who just don't have a faith because they've never learned anything. There are people who don't believe because they just don't have a faith where they're from and they don't have any sort of education about any type of faith. That I understand. To me, there is a moral issue about trying to convert people of one faith to another. And that, for me, arises from it's sort of demeaning or like dismissive to other faiths. It's the same thing with like in the movie they talk about, or I don't think they mention it specifically in the movie, but the idea of salvation has always rubbed me the wrong way. I get that it's literally a biblical term and that's why it's used. But to say like if you like the Shinto or the Buddhists, when they say they're trying to bring salvation to the Buddhists, it sort of reads in a negative light to me because it makes obviously it's complicated, but to me it's like
I could see it coming off as
you don't care about their beliefs or anything.
Yeah, which I could see it coming off as like you're wrong.
And I run into this online a lot. You'll see people making innocent videos about nothing, or like they make a joke and all the comments are like just talking strictly about God in the Judeo-Christian sense, like capital G God. And when anyone disagrees with them, they're like, it's not so much, oh, okay, it's more so you're wrong. This is why you're wrong, and we need to change it. I think with people like me who are non-believers or people who are agnostic, I have no problem trying to convert them. But it's just always something has rubbed me the wrong way about trying to convert someone of a different faith. I'm less rubbed the wrong way about it in the time of this movie because religion is so much more central to life. Like religion in even the most common people's life is pretty important. Like you are raised in it much more strictly. Like even than most strict devout Catholics now, there's a lot more into the daily life and the weekly life of a person that is based in religion. So when you're first encountering new people that have new faiths, I can understand the instinctual idea to do it. But now in the modern time is where it rubs me more the wrong way because we have such a more broad idea of it. And that's why there's like missionaries and stuff still, or missions. I don't know if they still call them missionaries, but they'll go to like Africa or South America and they'll build a church or build a hospital or they'll build these buildings. And the charity work is really nice. I just never liked that they're there also like trying to convert people who have their own native belief that their people have been following for X thousand years or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, I was gonna say that I know like in the time period that silence is taking place in, kind of like how you said, is religion is definitely more central to just the human existence as opposed to now. But at least in my experience, I don't see Catholics actively going around trying to convert people.
It may not be Catholics. Again, like I said, since I don't follow, I only know like the basic differences between Protestants and Catholics. It's like, what is it? Catholics have priests, Protestants have reverends, or is that backwards?
Yeah, Catholics have priests, Protestants have pastors, reverends. You could call them one
Whatever.
or either, I believe.
And then saints are really only a Catholic thing. There's not many saints, or no saints really in Protestant churches.
Saints are just more. I know there's saints in both. Saints.
Or are they more deified in Catholicism and more?
Wouldn't say praise. Deified
or not.
Praise would probably. I feel like praise would be an.
Honored.
Yeah, honored would be the perfect description.
Yeah, they're more honored in Catholicism than they are in Protestantism. And I know, obviously, with the Catholics, you have like the Vatican, the Pope, everything like that. You don't have that in Protestant sects,
right?
So I know like the surface level differences, but I don't know like if someone just was preaching on the street, I couldn't tell you. Or if I saw someone like preaching online, I couldn't tell you.
Right.
Because I mean, obviously, it's based off the same book most of the time.
Right.
Or other teachings, because I know it's not just the Bible. There's the other texts and stuff.
Sure.
That are used, other gospels and all that fun stuff.
So, would you say that Silence as a film, or it's a novel also, isn't it? Wasn't it based off of a novel?
It's an original novel by a Japanese author. I have his name written down somewhere. Endo Shusaku.
Would you say it's a pro or anti-religious movie?
I would definitely say pro, especially given the ending. I could see why you could view it as anti, but again, given what I know about Scorsese, it's definitely a film about struggling with challenges of faith and struggling with being challenged by your faith. But I still think in the end it is ultimately pro Catholicism or pro Christianity, because the Christian characters come out looking a lot better than any of the Japanese characters.
Right.
Which obviously is easy to do when you have the Japanese characters committing essentially mini genocide against Christians.
I feel like I'd argue that I feel like the Catholics in the film look pretty bad, just in the sense that I'm sure even coming from from an atheist perspective, it's the simple act of like stepping on a bronze plate to save lives. Don't you think that comes off as like pretty bad?
I could see where that's coming from. Maybe thinking that is a strictly negative thing. I think it's the focus on that isn't supposed to be the people. It's supposed to be the internal conflict and the struggle. You can obviously tell it's not easy on Rodrigues as he does any of those things. You can tell that it's a big internal struggle, and because he ultimately does to save 5 people, and because Father Ferreira also does the same to save however many he saves or whatever. I think because the other thing is it's based loosely off of a true story. It's just hard to. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say what it would be. Because maybe the characters don't come off well, but faith is what kept him strong for so long and what kept him going. So in that sense, you could say it showed his faith, because his faith didn't even break in the end. And that would be seen as pro-faith, and that faith is strong enough to overcome all these obstacles. Even if it has to be suppressed and hidden, it still exists. But would you say Rodriguez, and I'll throw Garupe in here too, Adam Driver's character, would you say that either of them are good fathers? And if so, at what point would you say that they stop being good priests and become either bad people or just bad Christians?
That's a really good question.
Because to me,
go ahead.
they were both pretty equally decent. They'd made some weird decisions, like when they first showed up in Japan. They immediately found a group of Christians and started helping them, which was good. Obviously, I understand the importance of faith in a community like that. So them being able to heal that group makes sense to me. But then he immediately tells one of the people to go tell everyone that priests are back and it's going to be okay now. And I'm like, priests were here when this all went bad the first time. Why is 2 being here now going to be any different? I get it's just to spread hope, but it just seemed a little naive to me. And they did seem really naive to me early on, the 2 main characters. But then the time I really started to like, and maybe this is what you're supposed to do. I really started to like Andrew Garfield's character more and dislike Adam Driver's character more when they have that hostage negotiation. And one of them says, if I am asked to step on what do they call? They have a name for it. What do they call it? The image.
Which image?
The image of Christ they have to step on. They have a specific name for it, but I can't recall what it was.
Oh, yeah.
Do you happen to remember?
No, I wouldn't. No, sorry.
Okay. No, that's okay. I just wasn't quite sure. When one of the characters, I think it's was it Mukicho, I think his name is? Or I talked about it earlier, but I can't remember his name. Mokichi. Sorry, when Mokichi asks if I'm asked to step on it, do I? Andrew Garfield's character, Rodriguez, is immediately like, yes, do it, step on it. Like, do what it takes to get out of this.
Mm-hmm.
And then Adam Driver's character immediately snaps and he's like, what the hell? Like, what are you talking about? No matter what, don't do it. And at that point, I feel like that sort of divides because they're both obviously devoted, but I think it kind of divides their morality tied to their faith. And I think that scene made me really like Andrew Garfield's character and start to dislike Adam Driver's character because it sort of showed the limits of both of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. For me, I'd say the only, I mean, obviously as a Catholic, I think renouncing the faith is the point where he becomes a bad priest.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, I think, especially the scene where they go out to kind of sunbathe, mm-hmm. When they were, or like they were taking a whole lot of risks that they were told specifically not to.
Yeah.
Potentially, I mean, maybe they just didn't understand the severity of the danger or mm-hmm. whatever the case may be. It just felt a little bit ignorant. And I'd mm-hmm. say that's another one of the problems that I have with both of the priests in the film is I feel like they're ignorant to the Japanese. Like it's hard to understand faith enough as it is. Mm-hmm. And when there's a language barrier involved.
Yeah, that adds.
Yeah, it's definitely
so
feel like it's difficult to contextualize the gospel within a culture that you don't necessarily understand.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what I was saying, where I found them both really naive early on. That's what I'm talking about, is those decisions they made were just a little surprisingly stupid. Like, really big risks. And they worked out for a while. I guess the last big moral, philosophical, theological, however you want to word it, question I would have for you would be, do you believe Father Rodriguez and Father Garupe are to blame, or do you believe that Father Rodriguez and Garupe are responsible for any of the deaths, morally or theologically, or however you want to break it down?
Theologically, I'd like to say no. It's the equivalent of me and you in a room, you with a gun pointing it at my loved one, and you telling me, jump or else I'm going to shoot this person.
Mm-hmm.
Me not jumping, you shooting that person. And I guess, if I were to jump, you wouldn't have shot. But at the same time, I didn't technically kill the person. Is that loose analogy?
It almost works. I would add one thing to it. What if you, or I'm trying to think. What if you handed me the gun and then this happened? Just to add a step to it, because they put these people back in the place of worship, essentially. So I want to add that one extra thing.
Revert back to the original question.
So would Father Rodrigues and Father Garupe be held responsible, or should they be responsible or viewed as responsible for any of the deaths in either a moral or theological way? And then you take it to the metaphor of, if I was holding somebody hostage and I told you to jump, or I would shoot them, I shoot them, you didn't pull the trigger, you didn't kill them, but what if you had handed me the gun? Just to add.
Right.
Because it's hard to give an exact metaphor, because they didn't hand the executioners the spear, but they did hand, or they did tell the criminal to commit the crime. Let's say that.
Right.
Because, I mean, it is religion, but in this scenario, they were telling these people to commit a crime for all intents and purposes.
I think that's it's such a hard question for me to answer, because I feel like it's two separate part of my brains.
Let me try and phrase it in a different way. Dominoes. The last domino is these people being executed. What would the first domino be? Well, the first domino would be the first Christian missionaries coming. One of those dominoes along the way is Adam Driver and Andrew Garfield's characters sailing to Japan to do this mission. So their domino falling led to this other domino falling, but does that mean they are in any way responsible for it? Because no, they didn't directly do it, but they did cause the chain of events that led to these deaths.
Yeah, and it's just a product of the environment too that makes it difficult to answer, because just the act of them going isn't inherently evil.
No, I agree with that 100%. I don't think anything they do is necessarily inherently evil. Morally reprehensible, maybe, in my opinion, but nothing they do is evil, which I think is a tough distinction to make, but I think it's one you have to, especially in a scenario like this. To my mind, evil would be, let's go back to your room analogy. Evil would be me shooting somebody. Morally reprehensible would be you not doing the simple task, or not as simple because it's not simple, but you not doing the task to prevent that shooting.
Right.
I think that's where, and that's obviously, morality is a personal view and personal choice. So it's obviously not going to be set in stone for anybody, or an easy area to agree upon.
I think to answer honestly, I just have to understand myself more and what separates theology from morality. Because I think initially
they don't necessarily have to be separated, and that's a perfectly valid choice you can come to too.
It's just hard to answer these questions in a sensitive way.
Oh, I understand. That luckily, through the course of this podcast, we'll hopefully both better come to terms with where our lines are on these things and our understandings of these things.
That's very true.
Will be a lot more exposure to different challenges or different ideas. All right, well, I've sort of hit my main talking points. Was there anything you wanted to touch on more about this movie?
Yes, I just wanted to look to ask you one final follow-up question since you asked me one.
Mm-hmm.
So my final question for you, since you kind of finished this conversation with a question for me,
Mm-hmm.
is do you think Silence as a film would have worked if the fathers in this case, or if the entire religion of the film was something other than Catholicism? Do you think it would have been received by audience as well? Do you think that the tones, the themes would have worked if it was like Jewish or Muslim or any of those separate religions?
I think it could. I don't know how well this film was honestly actually received. I know it didn't make any money. I think it was shot for like $50 million and only made like $20 million. Critically, I think it was pretty well received, but I think that could go with almost anything. I feel like, as long as there is a similar story, because I think this level of devotion and faith and belief in one's religion and devotion to that isn't exclusive to Catholicism or Christianity in any way. So I think it could work, assuming it's a similarly structured religion. I don't think it could work necessarily, say, if it was a Buddhist that was put in this situation, because I think the way Buddhism is practiced and the way Buddhist studies and Buddhist belief works, it's just so fundamentally different than Christianity that I think it would structurally not work. But I feel like you could probably slot in a Muslim main character, a Muslim main faith, and it could still probably work. Or even a Protestant instead of a Catholic, and I think it could work. I think that's the key thing, is the strong level of devotion and the conflict that causes, because that is the antithesis, or the thesis of the film. Sorry, is that faith can provide this level of strength and courage, and I feel like as long as you have a religion where that is also possible and a key tenet, then it could probably work. It could work with a Hindi main character, perhaps. I know Hindis are polytheistic, so that gets a little complicated, but I still think Hindi faith is so centrally devoted to some core ideas that it could probably work. And again, it may work with the Buddhists as well, but Buddhism is so structurally different than Catholicism and Christianity that it might be a little bit harder. Critically and even commercially, it probably would have done worse, admittedly, if it wasn't a Catholic Christian movie, because
right,
especially in America isn't a Catholic Christian religious country in any way officially, but unofficially it is a very, very Christian. Not very Catholic, surprisingly, but very Christian. Like, I didn't learn this until like 2 weeks ago. You know, we've only had 2 Catholic presidents.
Yeah. Bill. No, sorry. Geez. What's our current president's name?
Joe Biden.
Joe Biden.
Not Bill Clinton. God. That was 20 years ago, but 30 years ago.
Joe Biden and Kennedy.
Yeah, which that's weird to me, because I feel like
it
Catholicism, at least to me, Catholicism seems more involved, not more involved, but like more strongly devoted than Protestant. But
sure.
Both of the Catholic presidents have been from the party that tends to be less religious in its talking points, which has always struck me as a little bit weird that the only 2 presidents that have been Catholic have come from that party. That's a whole different discussion we don't need to get into, though. It's just a weird thing that I'm like, for such a strong representation, it's just weird. But yeah, I feel like if this movie was about a Muslim, critically and commercially probably would have done worse in America because it would just get seen less because there's just less of that interest in the United States,
Right.
unfortunately. Like, I mean, it makes sense. This movie probably didn't do well in a Muslim majority country because there's just a harder to connect to the main character sort of thing going on, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like even as someone who doesn't believe or has no religion, it's still, I found it easy to connect with the main character. I sympathize with his struggles. I, up to a certain point, respected him for standing by his beliefs and everything like that. So yeah, I feel like it could probably work. It would just depend on the movie. Structurally could work. I don't know if it would work because of the rest of the world around it, you know?
Oh yeah, definitely. Do you think that you understand, like, why do you think you understand the stories of like Christianity more than you do than like, I guess, Muslim or Jewish stories?
It's just prevalence, you know? I've lived in England and the United States my entire life, two countries that are predominantly Christian Catholic in some way. So they're just more commonplace. Everybody knows, even if you're not religious, everybody knows the core idea of Christmas. You know, it's just so culturally like penetrative to American society. Same with Easter. Easter is so like culturally penetrative to American society and even English society that it's hard to not know. And obviously, when you learn about Easter, you learn about Christmas, you learn about some of the other stories that come in involved with it. So I do celebrate Christmas in a non-religious sense. I don't really do Easter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I buy candy, but that's just because I like the candy. But I don't like celebrate Easter in any sense. But I can celebrate Christmas in a completely non-religious sense because it is so culturally significant to America, and I feel like that's why I know so much. I do know a decent amount about like Hindi religion, Buddhism, Muslim, Islam. Sorry, and that's also because I self learned. I was just interested in these topics, so I studied them because I do. I don't think I mentioned this up top or in the episode 0, but I while I'm not religious, I do have a really big interest in religion and learning about all different faiths and beliefs and the like ideas and philosophies that come from those. So I know a little bit, but I feel like in America or in most of the Western world, it is just super easy to know the basics of Christianity because it is so culturally prevalent. Like I don't know if you want to say this on the podcast, so let me know if you want to cut this out. I was involved in your wedding, and you had a Catholic
Mm-hmm.
wedding, so I obviously sat through a Catholic sermon, like wedding sermon, and there was all the normal like Catholic rituals and everything like that. I've been to an Easter Sunday service when I was like 12 or something with a family friend. So it's just so common around here that it's kind of hard to not, unless you have your own faith that you are so strictly devoted to and paying attention to. It's just hard not to absorb some level of the Christian belief or a Christian idea, not their belief, but the Christian story and ideas into your daily life. Like, it's technically not religious, but America's motto, like official country motto, is it in God we trust, I think, which that's capital G God, which implies Judeo-Christian again. So as an American, it's just hard to completely separate yourself from that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, on that note,
Do you think we're about ready to wrap it up on silence?
I think we are. I think this was a difficult first episode for me to discuss with you because I know it's a lot of hard-hitting topics for just Catholics and Christians and just things that are hard to fully understand and fully it's easy to say one thing and to believe one thing, but being put into the situation,
it's also hard to put it into words sometimes, and
right.
Like because,
so I appreciate you asking me some hard-hitting questions
because we both watched this movie
Hopefully,
the night before recording this, right?
Right.
So we've had a little bit of time to digest and think on it. There's still so much in the movie, and in your own personal beliefs, that it's always going to be hard to articulate that in a way that sounds somewhat intelligent.
Right. So yeah, thank you for having me on our podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me on our podcast. If you were to rate this movie out of 10, what would you give it?
Oh gosh, I'd probably give it an 8 or a 9.
I was gonna go 8, so that.
Yeah, I know. This is kind of up my alley, and just with films, it's definitely one of those films that would be hard to recommend to someone.
Yeah, I agree. Would this be a film you would rewatch, do you think?
I think if I had the time, I would.
Mm-hmm.
But it being a 3-hour movie, it's kind of hard to set aside 3 hours and be completely invested.
I think you also have to be like mentally and emotionally ready, because it's kind of a lot. Like, I knew it would be difficult. I didn't expect to see like several people crucified in the ocean and like slowly die.
Right.
And like some of that stuff, I was like, this isn't like a fun Friday night watch, you know? Long work week, ready to relax and wind down. I'm gonna watch a movie that's just, I mean, it's a great movie. It's just hard to watch in some parts, and that's good. Films should challenge you. So I'm not saying that in any sort of negative sense.
Maybe episode 100, we can come back and re-experience
and see if we've gotten any smarter, or if we've just gotten stupider somehow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I thought what would be fun, I probably should have ran this by you at first. What category would you like to jump to next? Horror or comedy?
I think we should jump into comedy.
Comedy? Okay.
Since this one was kind of, I think next episode would be nice to have something a little bit lighter.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I have one main pitch for comedy, and then like a second one. And I'll kind of let you choose between the two. I'll give you like a brief rundown of the two. My first choice would be The Life of Brian, which is a Monty Python movie. So it's a British comedy. And my second one would be This Is the End, which is the Seth Rogen comedy from 2012 or 14 or whatever. The Seth Rogen one is about the apocalypse, and it's about him and his friends. They play themselves, and they're trying to survive like the real apocalypse in Los Angeles, and how they navigate the biblical apocalypse, like the rapture type of thing, you know? And Life of Brian is about a man named Brian who is born, I think, the same day as Jesus, or like really close to Jesus. And then his entire life, people keep accidentally mistaking him for Jesus. So he has to deal with like the consequences of that. Being mistaken for Jesus by Romans, by believers, everything like that. So do you have an input on which you'd prefer? And if not, I will just say we should go with Life of Brian. But that's a very biased pick, admittedly.
I think we should go with This Is the End.
Okay. I am fine with it.
Yeah, I'm just interested to see like how, I mean, with it being about the rapture, just seeing how, like, I don't know, I think it'd be a fun film to pick apart.
All right, then episode 2.
And it might just be a dumb, fun comedy with Seth Rogen and James Franco and all those rascals.
All right. Well, then Life of Brian will be our second comedy, so that'll be whatever episode that is. I don't want to do math or think about that right now. So episode 2 will be coming out in 2 weeks. This will be a bi-weekly podcast. I probably should have mentioned up front, but 2 weeks. I don't know what day we're going to upload this. I'm thinking I'm going to try and get this out Sunday. So this will be Sunday night, roughly every 2 weeks podcast.
Yeah, I think Sunday would be fitting.
I didn't even think of that. It just happened to be the day after we were recording. But you're right, it fits. So this will be every other Sunday. Episode 2 will be This Is the End. And then episode 3, we will be doing a horror movie. And our first 5 episodes we're going to work through. one film of each of the 5 categories just to like establish our bases. And then from there, I don't want to be as strict with that. We could do a comedy, a horror, a gospel, a comedy, a horror. We don't have to do one of each type of film in a row. We can just kind of break it up as we see fit. Like Christmas, we could watch, like the week of Christmas, we could watch a Christmas movie, for example, even if that doesn't technically fit into any of our category, or not fit in our category, but anything that doesn't fit like a new category. If it's the same category we did the week before, it's thematic, so we can do it. I feel like if we're too strict on ourselves, we're not going to have as much fun. Anyway, thank you everybody for listening. I've been one of your hosts, Archie. I've been joined by the lovely Xavier, and we will hopefully see you guys in the next episode.
Bye-bye.